Hey guys, LevelCap and Luetin here. Today we're going to be talking about free-to-play model, how it affects first-person shooters, and some of the stigma that's involved with the genre. Currently it's widely regarded as maybe games that aren't quite as good as pay-on-release games, or games that are pay to win, and how the free-to-play model is becoming so popular, sort of taking over the environment. So, Luetin, what do you think about this whole free-to-play frenzy?
I think it's somewhat concerning and somewhat very exciting because I think there's multiple different ways that you can look at these things. I think that people have a lot of misunderstanding about actual free to play models, what they mean. People are very quick often to call them pay to win because they think that when you're in game, all you have to do is just buy the good stuff and automatically you're the best person at the game and you're just going to dominate everyone else. That's not often how these games pan out, and it's often not what the developers themselves are looking to create in a game. Because if you think about it, if they did that in a game, all that would happen is they'd have a lot of people. They'd have probably a very small percentage of people who are actually doing that, and everyone else is just pissed off, and their game is probably going to bomb. So it's not really in their interests to do that. I am
Correct.
concerned though. Yeah, I am concerned though at the same time that a lot more developers and stuff are sort of inkling and making kind of suggestions towards these kind of things, probably because these games do end up, I think, generating more kind of revenue in some ways.
Well, everybody looks at League of Legends, that's sort of the poster boy for free to play, because it's one of the most profitable games out right now, I believe.
Yeah.
And so everybody wants a piece of that pie. And I know a lot of developers are making all these free to play games now. Some of them are being done well, and some of them are clearly just sort of like trying to grab a little bit of cash
Yeah.
off of like some sort of game that's copying another model out there. But I think it definitely has its benefits. What do you think about the obvious benefit is the player base.
Yeah.
Just having that increased player base. There's a lot of people out there, younger kids who don't have a lot of money, who can't necessarily spend 50, 60 bucks on video games frequently, that all of a sudden now have a huge genre of free to play games to choose from, and they can try them all if
Yeah.
they want to because it's free.
Yeah.
And then beyond that, getting them in to spend a little money on something that they decide that they like. It's just a great way to bolster your player base right from the get-go.
Yeah, but it's actually necessary in some points as well. When you think about games like PlanetSide 2 or upcoming recently for the PlayStation, it could be Dust 514, these games require large player counts in order to actually function. If they did not have large players, you just have massive maps that are completely empty, and it would be very, very boring. No one would want to play them. So I don't think these games can actually function as pre-sold, like just standard store-bought games. They would not work in that way. They probably wouldn't have a large enough community. And like you say, by putting them out there as free-to-play, it's basically kind of creating the foundation that the game is built on. It needs that player base to survive in the first place. And these kind of free-to-play MMOs are not the same as our kind of more standard, the kind of older model of MMO, the subscription-based model, things like World of Warcraft,
Yeah.
because a lot of those games were kind of PvE-based. There was a lot of kind of questing, a lot of player versus environment situations where it didn't matter if there was people to play with or not. You may only require anyway like 2-3 people to play with, so it didn't really matter. You didn't need to bump those numbers in there to get it working. But with games
Do
like
you
PlanetSide 2, it does.
do you feel that the free to play model sort of seems to reflect games that are maybe not quite so standard in concept, like they trying to break the mold a little bit, which generally is a little less popular to begin with, so they need some of that help from the free to play model. Like you said, Dust and PlanetSide, those games on the surface, sure, they're first person shooters, but beyond that, they're far more complex than your average Battlefield or Call of Duty game, and they're, I would say, less marketable
Hmm.
in that area. So they probably, do you think they need help from the free to play model?
Well, I do, and I think that also my kind of analogy for it would be kind of trawler fishing. They need to kind of have a big net, and they trawl through everyone, and out of that trawling, they're going to get they're going to refine it down to what they're actually trying to get to, which is the players that are going to enjoy those games. But if they didn't make them free to play, maybe those players in the first place would be go, well, sounds kind of good, but I'm kind of happy with what I have right here, so probably won't bother. But if they got free to play, they're going to be like, yeah, I'll try it and see if it's good, and then they really will find out. But I mean, with stuff like Dust, for example, again, again, like you say, it is complicated. It's built around the kind of Eve system, that model. I have been trying it out myself a little bit. Personally, I don't know if it's for me, but this is the point. I have had the opportunity to try it, look at it, and from what I can understand, it is a very interesting concept what they're trying to do there. But I think it is necessary as a free-to-play model to capture that audience in the first place, and I think it does give a lot of benefit to the games. A lot of the time we see very often people saying that they're frustrated because games coming out are not very innovative anymore. They're very kind of copy and paste, especially within FPS. There's so many FPS
or not
games.
well supported too.
Yeah.
You're going to get that support with the free to play model.
Yes.
Because they got to keep the players in the game. That's how they make their money.
Yes.
That's one of the things that makes me feel safe when I play a free to play game, is like, I know that there's developers working on the game right now who are concerned with keeping the game fun to play and interesting, as opposed to a buy on release game. So many of those games have a huge community that's always just angry about like lack of developer support or moving on to the next title before finishing the bugs in the current title.
Yeah, I mean, I have literally given up on certain developers based on that sort of thing, because I really enjoy having some kind of ability to communicate with developers. It's really, really fun, and I've done that with my channel. You've done that with your channel, where we can actually talk to people. I've done it with a couple of games, so have you, and it's really interesting. And the thing is, why shouldn't they listen to their community? After all, they are developing the games. If I was a developer, I would be genuinely interested in the people that I was making games for, because at the end of the day, surely that is the entire premise, the whole purpose of what you're doing in the first place. And it kind of irritates me, this attitude of the kind of slightly more standardized older games, where they're kind of like, here's our game. Right, thanks very much.
I think you're going to see a bit of an industry change, and
They
I
have
think
to.
And as much as I praise Sony for doing this, I'm going to praise them a little more. They're sort of leading the charge, and I think they're really showing the industry that, like, hey, if we actually designate, like, say, 4 developers on our team to also be more in touch with the community, that's going to be great for marketing, making the community happier, all that stuff. I mean, the dedication of the PlanetSide community it's up there. It's like almost on the level of the Eve community.
Yeah.
And that's just something that you don't get from making a game and then not talking to the community. So I think you're going to see developers looking at that and seeing it as marketing potential, because that's the only way you're going to get it to become an industry standard. So all of a sudden it's going to become standard place to have not just your PR guy or your community rep, but you're going to actually have developers designated as sort of community people that need to tweet and Facebook and talk with people frequently and be really much more involved.
Yeah, and as we've said, it is really necessary, because it goes hand in hand with that whole free-to-play model, where basically you're making these purchases in game. So they really need to understand their community if they want to provide the best stuff to them. It's the same with any product. When you're selling a product, you need to understand your market so that you can sell effectively to them. So when you have a game like a free-to-play model, where in-game you have these microtransactions, you're buying equipment, you're buying tools and all these sorts of things, you need to understand what it is that people are doing, because how you originally set out the game may change. It's very common that gamers themselves, when actually playing, will sort of slightly develop and go off in different ways, or they'll find different ways of doing things that weren't originally planned. So having a really good relationship with your community so you can understand what they're doing is going to directly benefit developers that are making free to play, because they're going to understand and say, hey, they haven't really been buying this tool here, A, but they have been buying a lot of B, so maybe we should start focusing a little bit more on that. We should do things, and then it's benefiting two things. It's benefiting the developer because they will get purchases from it. It's developing the community. It's benefiting them because they're getting what they want out of the game. So it goes hand in hand.
There's this sort of mindset that the devs think that the community's stupid. You get it from other games where it's like, well, you guys all want this, and but that would actually ruin the game, or that would imbalance everything. And sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong. But the point is there's so many ideas out there in the community, and the community plays the game more than the developers. This is something that's true with pretty much every game out there. If you're making the game, you literally don't have enough time to play it as much as your fan base. Your fan base is going to know every little nook and cranny of that game better than you, because they get to play it hours and hours a day. You work on the game, you play it, you work on it for hours and hours a day. You're probably tired. You don't want to play it when you get home from work or whatever.
Yeah.
So they actually know the game. They know how it plays. They know how it's balanced better than the developers in most cases. And that's something that you really have to focus on. One of the other really big benefits of the free-to-play model, and this is something that I sort of realized, and it's made me, the Battlefield model has made me think about this a lot, was dividing the player base. When you come out with DLC in a
Yes,
non-free-to-play game,
yes,
that's
yes.
more money. A lot of people who are enjoying the base game might not have the money to buy the new DLC, you know, especially if they're younger. Their parents gave them the money for the first game, but now they're not so willing to they give them the money for the expansion or whatever. So you divide those people there, or just people that are not quite as into the game at that point, don't feel like spending another $30 or $40 on the expansion. Free to play can give you all the expansion stuff or just make it available to you. You know, a free to play version of Battlefield 3 would have been like, here's the maps for the new expansion,
Yep.
but we're not going to give you any of the weapons
Yes.
or camos or that stuff. That's going to cost you money. So instead of having servers that are very limited to like, here's the original maps, here's back to Karkin maps, here's maps for this expansion, you can now have servers that just mix in all the favorite maps from all the expansions,
Yep.
and you're not going to be limiting anybody out there. So you don't divide the player base but like that, and I think that actually really does hurt some of the current models. And I wouldn't be surprised if developers, like even from some of these big AAA titles, start to look into some of those sort of things.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, definitely. I was actually going to say that point that you made there about the whole kind of giving the maps but not other equipment, because that is such a strong thing. And I get it all the time. I have people coming to me saying, we can't play on your server because we don't have the maps. And I think it's not just a case of actually making profit for them, but also extending the longevity of the game. I mean, when you think about how long these titles are going to be around for, when we look at how long Battlefield has been around for, okay, it's been around, the Battlefield 3 title has been like a year and a half, so it'll be 2 years perhaps by the next one coming out. And so they need that if they want to continue extending the player base. I know many people who have gotten bored and left because, you know, they didn't maybe want to pick up DLCs, but they, you know, they didn't have anything else to do, anywhere else to go. Whereas with a free-to-play model, well, that's just going to continue and continue because they're going to keep pushing more content in for their player base in order to extend the longevity of the game, and they can just add to it and add to it. And I think that is another strength there. One of the negatives, though, that I do find with the kind of free-to-play model, you often, like we've said already, you get these kind of complicated games. They often end up being very clan-based, very clan support. And this is one reason why I haven't felt to get into them very much, because they really require a lot of dedication often in order to function. You would imagine that a free-to-play title could actually be kind of casual. It's the kind of game where you think because it's free, you can just hop in, hop out, you don't really need to. It's actually kind of the opposite. It's often more that you need a hell of a lot more dedication because there's so much going on, and the clan-based part of it is really the strength there. When you look at games like PlanetSide and Dust, you have these large clans, factions that are really running the show, and they will come in and destroy and dominate everything. And the whole kind of micro-purchasing thing comes hand in hand with that. Dust, I think, perhaps slightly is more preferential to this than PlanetSide. But I know that with Dust, because it's linked to EVE, right now, it's not open to these large corporations to actually use their funding to push the game. But what's going to happen when the game actually comes out and releases? It's been mentioned slightly in a few articles and things, and I don't think they really know how it's going to go down yet. But basically, as you might know, in EVE, you have the very, very large corporations. They have huge built up wealth, years and years of playing. These corporations have massive power, buying power, and when this game comes out, Dust, it's going to be in their interests to control some of the game. And I think what we'll see is that these large corporations are going to be funding players, pushing massive wealth, in-game wealth, into these things, and you could end up with certain teams just absolutely dominating casual players who don't have that kind of support. They obviously want to balance it as much as possible, but I mean, you've got more experience in Planet side of this. Do you find that that's the case, that you have these kind of larger groups, and it's more of a negative that you don't see in other games and you see it more in free to play? Do you find that?
Oh well, I think what you're trying to say is in MMO free to play,
Yeah,
for sure, because there's definitely free to plays that aren't MMO that don't have that aspect to it.
Yeah, that's what I was
But
thinking of more.
yeah, PlanetSide is 100% dominated by the bigger factions out there, and that's just sort of the nature with, I think, the MMO or the
Yes.
MMO FPS. You're always going to run into that. It's better to be in the big group of organized players than sort of dawdling around on your own. And they also offer, if you play in the bigger groups of organized players, it can be easier to rank up and unlock some of that equipment. Along the exact same lines that you're talking about is that in free-to-play games, and you sort of just made me think of this on the spot, was that you do have to spend that extra amount of time compared to a non-free-to-play game to sort of get up to a higher level. I was thinking like in Crisis, which just came out,
Yeah.
took me a few days to unlock every gun in the game,
Mm.
and I'm still unlocking a few sights and attachments for each weapon, but for the most part, I can play just as well as any other player out there. I've got
Yeah.
everything at my disposal. In PlanetSide, I've put over 180 hours into that game, and there's still tons of things that I feel like I'm lacking. Some of my characters are, and that's sort of the nature of free to play because everybody likes to throw out the term pay to win out there, and depending on how true that is or not, there is always that element of time requirement to get up to the level that you need to be.
Yeah.
PlanetSide does a good job of letting you get to everywhere you need to be without needing to spend a dime, but it's going to take you a lot longer. Like starting out in that game, I can spend some money and get rocket pods or some good anti-vehicle rocket launchers, which would really help me stay alive. They are actually extremely valuable tools in the game, which you can get, but if you're going to get it normally, you have to spend, weeks playing, and in that time, you're not going to have any good defense against certain attacks.
Yeah, and it leads me kind of on to the other point I was going to make, which is that one of the big bugs for me with free to play is often the fact that in order to kind of give people enough interest to keep purchasing, they have to kind of have a broad range of things that you can kind of invest in. Whereas with pre-bought games, just standard store-bought games, when you buy that game, you can achieve everything in that game. You can find everything, you can unlock everything. If it's in the game, you can unlock it. So you have a feeling of kind of 100%, sort of investment in that title. You own it. Everything you can get out of that game. When you buy Battlefield, you can unlock everything. You can get everything. You don't need to do anything else. You can access every element of the game. But in the free-to-play model, there's often a huge, as I say, kind of purchasing element to it. And I know it was quoted, there's a couple of things I read recently about this, and one game, I cannot remember the game, I'm afraid, but one game was quoted as saying if you wanted to purchase every in-game element, it would cost you somewhere around $1,600. Now, that's going to be a figure...
That's no problem for most games, actually. PlanetSide, I believe, easily tops that. I believe Blacklight, you could top that. Almost all of them, I think, if you break down buying every aesthetic thing in the game, will cost you over $1,000.
Yes,
and
exactly.
On that, it's interesting what some of the games are doing. Have you been following Tribes?
Yeah.
They have released, I guess Tribes is sort of maybe nearing the end of its cycle or its popularity cycle. Maybe it's dying off a little bit.
Yeah.
And so they released a pack that's here's everything in the game for $40.
Wow.
So you almost get at the end of the life cycle of these free-to-play games a pack that's like, here's everything for the price of an actual game, and now you get tons and tons of free-to-play content
That's pretty
completely
interesting.
unlocked.
I think there's two ways that you can look at it. One is that it's a bit frustrating that you can't purchase everything in the game, because I know a lot of people feel like if they have a game, they want to go and unlock everything. They want to own everything. They want to be able to customize their character and access and try out all those different things. They want to be able to do that. However, another way to look at it is, as we've said, these games often offer a slightly more specialist style. The design of the game is a little bit different to some of these more kind of generic titles, you might say. And you could argue that this kind of they're actually kind of focusing people deliberately to try and pick more specialist kind of styles of kit. So they're saying, well, we have got all these choices here, but if you were going to purchase that, it's going to cost a lot. But you might want to go down a slightly more focused route for your character, so you're going to pick things more specific to you. And in doing so, they're making sure that people actually go down these kind of more specific focused routes for their characters, so that you hone your skills. And I think that's kind of a good, admirable thing to do, because very often you see in games people trying to be a jack of all trades. They're doing this, they're doing that, and they're not really that great at all things. I mean, look at sort of Battlefield. Everybody wants to be an amazing jet pilot, amazing helicopter pilot. They want to be an assault guy. They want to be a sniper. They want to play every single role. And I think it's a good kind of divergent sort of thought to go more specific and say, well, you could do all of that, but we're going to try and sort of lead you more towards maybe we're doing two things. You'll sort of have two main roles and focus on that thing. And then, it kind of builds up characters. When you think of, the very fact that they're MMOs as well. When you play an MMO, you usually take one class or style, and then you become very, very good at that class. And it makes you more of a name within the community as well. You go like, oh yeah, Rhaegar, he's a really fantastic warrior or whatever. And he kind of gets known on the server for being like that. Whereas on a FPS game where everyone's just doing everything all the time, unless you are an astonishing top first-class competitive player or amazing in YouTube or something like that, nobody's ever going to really know you. But within MMOs, you might kind of get that whole thing going on with kind of forum communities and so on and so on. So I think that is kind of another interesting route to go down, and how these games differ and it comes directly into the whole purchasing element. And so it's not just necessarily a negative thing. It's not just about the money. I think that's the point that we're trying to make here, is that it actually affects other things, other dynamics in the games. It's not just about money, and I think that's often how people see the free-to-play model.
Yeah, well, and that's interesting. And I think it's harder to do that kind of specialized balance in first-person shooters because so many shooters now rely on, like, okay, you're in a battle and you're getting killed by tanks and your setup is for infantry.
Yes.
So when you get killed, you need to go get your anti-tank setup and deal with those tanks. So you need good variety in a lot of those games. So it gets a little bit trickier when you go into the FPS model versus the MMORPG model, because you can be a cleric in an MMO and you're just the healer. That's what you do. People know you for healing.
Yeah.
But FPS is different in that front. And I recognize that the free-to-play models generally have so much stuff in the game that you're never going to be able to get all of it. And they're really banking on sort of the whole Diablo thing, where people love gear. They love collecting loot and things that make them aesthetically different than other players out there. And so having that big of a basically pool to pick from allows you to really have that individuality that you're talking about from an aesthetic point, as opposed to perhaps like what your abilities are in some of the other games. And they're definitely banking on that. And I think it's a good path to take.
Yeah, and I think, there's a lot of development going on with free-to-play right now. There's a huge amount. But one thing that's definitely going to be sure is that free-to-play is sort of here to stay now. It's a development, it's a genre that's going to be embedded in games from now on. And it's really, the ball is in the community's court. Because if the community supports these titles, supports these games, and the developers also get involved really heavily with the community, they're going to become stronger. At the end of the day as well, it's down to what people want from their games. If developers don't give what gamers want, the game won't do well. And I think that says as much about these titles as anything else.
All right, so I think that pretty much wraps it up for this episode of On the Level. We'd love to hear what you guys think about the free-to-play model. Do you like it better? Do you think we're going to have a split industry? What games do you think function better with free-to-play versus pay on release? So thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you next time. This is Luetin and LevelCap signing off.